The death of Montezuma changed everything. Inside the palace compound, the atmosphere had become suffocating. Every corridor carried tension. Every shadow suggested danger. The Spaniards were trapped inside the very city they had once entered as honored guests. Now they were surrounded on all sides. Hernán Cortés and Pedro de Alvarado understood the reality of their position immediately. The fragile arrangement that had allowed them to maintain control over Tenochtitlan had collapsed with Montezuma's death. There would be no peaceful exodus now, only survival. Cortés knew staying meant destruction, so he made the only decision left to him. They would flee. But before they moved, he attempted one final deception. Messengers were sent to the Aztecs requesting a one-week ceasefire. Cortés claimed that if peace were granted, the Spaniards would return the treasures they possessed and depart the city peacefully at the end of the truce. The request itself was strategic, not sincere. He needed time. Time to prepare. Time to escape. Whether the Aztecs believed him mattered less than whether they relaxed their vigilance even slightly, because Cortés had no intention of waiting a week. Inside the compound, preparations began immediately. The city's causeways had already been damaged in several places by the Aztecs. Bridges connecting sections of the elevated roads had been removed, leaving dangerous gaps above the waters of the lake. The Spaniards responded with engineering. A portable wooden bridge was constructed, heavy but movable, designed to be carried forward and laid across broken sections as they advanced. It was clever, necessary, but dangerously slow. At the same time, Cortés issued another order. All accumulated treasure was to be packed for transport. Gold, jewels, and any precious ornaments that had not yet been melted down. Anything portable and valuable enough to carry. What could not be organized centrally, he opened to the men. "Take what you can carry," he told them. For many soldiers, exhausted and terrified after months inside Tenochtitlan, the temptation proved irresistible. They filled their pockets, stuffed gold into armor, loaded themselves with bars, ornaments, chains, anything they believed might survive the journey. Some became barely mobile beneath the weight. Others ignored warnings entirely. In that moment, greed overpowered caution, and many would pay for it with their lives. Cortés then faced another crucial decision: the route. There were three possible ways out of the city. North, toward Tlatelolco, offered the least immediate danger, but required a long and difficult trek through heavily populated districts. South, toward Coyoacán and Iztapalapa, was possible, but the towns there had become deeply hostile to the Spaniards. West, toward Tlacopan, offered the shortest route, also the most direct, and despite the danger waiting there, Cortés chose it. Speed mattered more than safety now. The longer they remained inside Tenochtitlan, the lower their chances became. The western causeway would have to suffice. Late in the evening on June 30th, 1520, the Spanish column began to move. Rain fell steadily over the city, not violently, but enough to muffle sound, enough to conceal movement. The timing felt almost providential. Under cover of darkness and storm, the army quietly departed the palace compound. Spanish soldiers marched in tense silence beside thousands of indigenous allies, including Tlaxcalans, who now understood they would either escape together or die together. The portable bridge was carried near the front. Horses moved carefully over slick stone. Armor creaked softly beneath the rain. For a time, it worked. The streets appeared empty. The city seemed asleep. The Spaniards wound westward through Tenochtitlan unnoticed, moving steadily toward the Tlacopan causeway. Hope began to rise. Perhaps they might actually escape. Then, near the causeway, the movement was spotted by Aztec scouts, elite eagle warriors, Tizoc's men. They recognized immediately what was happening. The alarm was sounded at once. Voices rose through the darkness. One cry became several, then dozens. A woman drawing water shouted the warning to nearby homes. Moments later, the alarm spread further still when an Aztec priest called out from atop the Templo Mayor. The city awakened instantly. Doors opened. Warriors poured into the streets. Canoes flooded into the canals. The darkness exploded into violence. Aztec warriors attacked from every direction. Some struck directly along the causeway, wielding swords lined with obsidian blades sharp enough to tear through flesh. Others attacked from the water. Spears flew through the rain. Arrows descended from rooftops. Stones launched from slings cracked against armor and bone alike. The Spaniards attempted to maintain formation, but chaos spread quickly. The portable bridge slowed movement at every broken section. Men shoved forward desperately. Horses panicked. The fighting became ferocious, and the rain made everything worse. Mud, blood, and water mixed beneath their feet. Among the defenders were Tizoc and Yaotl. They moved with the Aztec counterattack as the city erupted around them. Tizoc's earlier fears had become certainty. This was no retreat born of diplomacy, an invader attempting to escape with the wealth of an empire. Yaotl fought beside his father. The fury around them needed no words. Everywhere they looked, the night blazed with violence. Spanish soldiers stumbled beneath impossible loads of treasure. Some slipped from the slick causeway into the dark waters below, and once they fell, the gold dragged them under. Armor pulled them deeper still. Many drowned before they could even cry out. Others were struck down while struggling to climb back upward. The lake itself became a massive graveyard. Near the front of the retreating column, Cortés pressed ahead with a vanguard of horsemen. He understood the danger of stopping. If momentum collapsed entirely, the whole force would be annihilated. So he drove forward, relentlessly, toward dry land, toward survival. Eventually, after brutal fighting, he reached the far end of the causeway near Tacuba. But much of his army remained behind, scattered across the broken crossing, fighting desperately in darkness and rain. Years later, Bernal Diaz del Castillo would defend Cortés's decision to continue forward, arguing that had he stayed behind trying to save everyone, the entire expedition likely would have perished. At the time, however, survival came at the cost of abandonment. As wounded survivors began staggering into Tacuba, the scale of the disaster became impossible to ignore. Men collapsed in exhaustion. Others arrived weaponless, bleeding, terrified. Most didn't arrive at all. Cortés watched the survivors emerge from the darkness in fragments, groups reduced to handfuls, friends missing, officers gone. The army that had once marched triumphantly into Tenochtitlan had been shattered. Then came another sight, approaching slowly through the rain, Pedro de Alvarado, unhorsed, wounded badly, supported by a small cluster of surviving Spaniards and Tlaxcalans. Even Alvarado, the fierce and reckless lieutenant who had triggered the catastrophe at the Feast of Toxcatl, looked broken. Cortés observed the scene in front of him, and according to Diaz del Castillo, it was there that tears came to his eyes. Not theatrical tears, not performative grief, but the realization of complete disaster. Everything they had worked for within Tenochtitlan had collapsed in a single night. By dawn, the survivors gathered themselves as best they could. Cortés remained alive. Alvarado survived, along with La Malinche. Many of the strongest cavalrymen and veteran soldiers had escaped as well, but they were blooded, exhausted, wounded physically and mentally alike. Cortés himself had suffered injuries during the fighting. Nearly all artillery had been abandoned or lost in the lake. Most of the horses were dead, and whatever illusion of invincibility the Spaniards once possessed had vanished entirely. They were no longer conquerors marching confidently inland. Now they were hunted men, trying to survive. The exact losses suffered that night remain debated to this day. The confusion and chaos made certainty impossible. Cortés later claimed that around 154 Spaniards died, along with over 2,000 indigenous allies. Others considered that number impossibly low. Whatever the true number, the losses were catastrophic. The night will be remembered forever as La Noche Triste, the night of sorrows. And for many Spaniards, the name was well earned. Yet the fighting was far from over. The Aztecs did not simply allow the survivors to leave. Warriors pursued them relentlessly around the northern edges of the lakes. The retreat became a moving battle. Every mile gained came at the cost of blood. Food remained scarce. Wounds worsened. Morale faltered. And still they marched. Tizoc's forces remained among those pressing the pursuit. Yaotl rode that momentum alongside his father. 1 week later, near Teotihuacan, the retreating Spaniards faced another major confrontation. At the Battle of Otumba, Cortés finally turned to fight the pursuing Aztec forces directly.